Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. I thought I'd do something a little bit different and dedicate an entire video to answering a lot of common questions which I get. Specifically, I put out a post on Instagram and I said basically you can ask me anything and I will answer it all. So right here I've got a list of over 100 questions. A lot of these questions are the same, so I sort of put the ones together that were the same. And I'll go through this list and try and answer as many questions as I can. Okay, so the first question I have here is how do I keep green chromis without introducing disease into my system? That's a good question. As you can see in this tank here, I've got a group of 5 chromis which I've had for quite a few years, and surprisingly I haven't had any issues with them. Often these will get either disease or bacterial infections such as Uronemia, if I can pronounce that correctly. But these guys have actually been pretty good. I think partly it's just finding a good fish store which really takes care of their stock and won't sell you fish that are diseased. Also ask your fish shop where they actually get their fish from. A lot of the ones here in Australia, because it's so heavily regulated, the fish are actually really good quality. Make sure that the fish are also eating as well in the shop before you go purchase them, and that'll hopefully save you a lot of heartbreak. But sometimes it's just all part of keeping fish, and unless you can quarantine them and do all that sort of stuff, you can't really guarantee anything. So next question is, I've currently got a 255 aquarium. What supplements do you use or like? So supplements is a tricky one. I think there's a lot of brands out there, but I think a lot of the products are actually pretty much the same. Like I could go into the lab at uni and replicate a lot of these products just from raw materials or trace elements and stuff which we use there. So I think the main thing is probably finding a brand which you personally like, or you know people, or just brands that you've been using for your aquarium for quite a while. Like me personally, I really like the guys at Quantum. I also find that their alkalinity is a little bit more concentrated than the stuff I've used previously, or other brands, sorry. So that's partly why I use them. But in saying that, like, to be honest, you could probably switch, and I do use a few different brands of other stuff, but the main thing is consistency. Once you sort of got or started using a brand of supplementation, you don't really want to switch too much, because then that can cause issues, because your tank will get used to uptaking a certain amount and then you're dosing in that, and if you go and change to a different product, that might upset the whole balance of it. So I recommend just finding a product. Often for me being a student, it also comes down to price point as well, which I know will for a lot of you guys. But yeah, apart from that, it's just kind of personal preference really. Okay, so this is probably one of the most asked questions I get, and it is, what size is this aquarium? I've answered this in previous videos before, so I will put the sizes just here for you. So next question. How do you establish your microbiome in your reef tank? This is a good question. Look, there's 101 ways to skin a cat. When I'm starting out a reef tank, I basically like to overload the water with nutrients. So basically, I'll set up the reef tank. If I've got another tank like this one going, as you know, I'm starting an upside down reef tank. What I've actually done is got some biomedia and put it in the bottom of this tank. So a lot of the beneficial bacteria that are in this tank will seed into the live rock and stuff I've got, which then I can transfer into the new tank. If you don't have the luxury of having a tank already set up, I recommend you go to your local fish shop and get some live rock. Live rock is really great. It's got so much microbial lost words. Diversity in it, so things like bacteria, all your little microorganisms. However, even though that is good, it does come with the possibility that you'll get pests and stuff as well. I'm not too fussed with that. I mean, you're going to end up with pests in your tank. People will try and quarantine them out, but it's just the fact of having a reef tank. But healthy corals and healthy fish should always be able to fend off these parasites. So if you've got parasites in your system, that's probably indicative of other things that are going on in that system. So yes, what I recommend doing is putting lots of nutrients in your water to start with, seeding your tank with good bacteria, add live rock, and then just wait for a few weeks. That would be my answer to that. Next question. So a lot of these other questions I get are also related to water clarity. So the question is, how do you get your water so clear, and what are your light settings using the AI app? So first one, so with water clarity, I use a filter roller, which is actually really good. I've used fleece and stuff in the past and filter socks, but they always seem to clog up really quickly, and I don't clean them quick enough. Filter rollers are great, especially automatic ones, because they'll always just be constantly cleaning the water and will never overflow, so there's very little chance of sort of your heavier particulate matter getting past them. So that's one way I keep my water clear. The other way is also using carbon in your water, adding charcoal carbon to your water. That will soak up a lot of the toxins and sort of like tannins and stuff like that as well. Also, surprisingly, heavy feeding as well. This encourages a lot of the bacterial load in the tank as well, and that will also help take up a lot of nutrients. But yeah, apart from that, and also peninsulas always look a little bit clearer than other tanks. So that's partly why I like them, is because if I had a black back on this, it would probably show up a lot of the particulate matter in it a lot more. As for the light settings, I've also previously put them in a video. I will put up sort of a rough thing just here of what I use for my lights. But this light setting I'm using just now is not what I normally keep my tank at. I like to film with this light setting, as it's a lot easier on the eyes. It looks a lot nicer in footage and stuff like that. But corals probably will not like it too much. You'll get a lot of algal growth doing this, but I'll put up the setting that I normally use to grow my corals. So, this is a good question, and one I don't really want to answer too much because my wife might get upset with me. But how much does a tank this size cost monthly? Look, it really depends. Some people can do tanks like this on a budget. Some people spend thousands on their tanks each month. Me personally, I'm not actually too sure. I should probably know. Electricity is not too much. I think it probably costs around like maybe $50 a month in electricity. Food and stuff, I couldn't even tell you, like 30, 40 bucks. Supplements, same, probably like $50 a month. Yeah, a few hundred a month, I'd say. But I mean, it's a hobby, and it's like your pet. How much would you spend on your pet each month? So yeah, that's a tough one to answer, but I'm not really able to. Sorry. Okay, so next question. What have you learned during your PhD which has changed the way you run your tank at home? To be honest, it's probably the other way around. So what have I learned in reef keeping that's actually changed the way I do my PhD? I think a lot of people in academia, there's some people who know a lot about coral husbandry, but the vast majority actually have never really kept tanks. And as you know, like in science, there's a lot of scientific rigor and everything has to be done exactly right, but it's quite opposite to the way that things are done in the reef keeping industry. Everything's quite anecdotal. Like if I say something works for this tank, it may not work for your tank. And that's partly just down to how variable these systems are, and just because of the microbial diversity, and one tank might have something slightly off. That's also something personally I actually quite like about these, is just you're always sort of chasing your own tail a bit and always researching different things. So I think one thing that doing a PhD has helped me in the way I run my tank at home is actually keeping track and measuring all my parameters, and just applying that bit of scientific rigor to my tank at home, because previously I was not good at that, and that's something I've had to learn in science, is just how to be really clean and methodological, so that's one thing that's really helped my tank at home. That's the next question. So do a video of the cabinet setup inside. I've actually already done that. I will put a link to that just here. It's not something I'm overly proud of. It's just a normal sump. It doesn't look pretty. However, on my next tank, it will look a lot prettier. Okay, so the next few questions are related to research, my PhD. So the first one is, what is your PhD about? So my PhD, it's kind of changed over time and expanded to other things, but the base of it is we're looking at how trace metals can impact the thermal bleaching tolerance of corals. So specifically my PhD, we're looking at a trace metal called manganese. This manganese is found in ultra low concentrations in the water, and we're talking about sub parts per billion. So for every billion particles, there's like 0.1 part of a billion is manganese, so very low amounts. And we're looking at dosing, like in our experiments, we dose anywhere up to like 20 parts per billion, and we found some cool effects from that. And we've actually got a paper out at the moment that we're working on getting published. So as soon as that comes out, I'll post it for you guys to read. Next question is, what are you studying at uni, and what are your tips for breaking into the marine science industry? So currently I'm doing a PhD in marine science. I wasn't always into science. I was originally an electrician and had enough of working in that industry. So I went to uni, thought I'd be a national parks ranger, worked at a zoo as well and an aquarium, and it was only after sort of I think it was my last year at university, I actually started trying and really loved the idea of getting into research. So I sort of got in more, I wasn't the best academically, but I had a real passion for corals and the marine environment, which really helped. So like I've worked previously in local fish shops, I've worked in an aquarium, I'd kept corals for a long time as well. That really helped me get into marine science. So getting industry experience really helps, and just having a general passion for corals and the things that you want to study as well. Okay, so next question, do you recommend doing a PhD in coral biology? I can't say whether I recommend it. I mean, it's everyone's different. Me personally, absolutely, I've loved it. I've loved every point of my PhD in my study, because I get to study something that I absolutely love and think that I can make a difference in the world. But do you recommend doing a PhD? It's up to you personally. Like, you've got to put in a lot of time and effort that you don't get paid for. Like, I'm working a lot more now than what I ever did in previous industries, but at the same time it doesn't really feel like I'm working a lot of the time because I just enjoy it so much. Okay, so next question is, what is your dream fish? I don't actually really have a dream fish, to be honest. I have some favourite fish. Probably one of my favourites is the coral beauty, and actually a lot of the angelfish, like the pygmy angels and stuff, are actually really cute. In saying that, I think just purely also because of the price, and it's something I probably will not be able to afford anytime, or at least in the near future, is a flame hawk. Not a flame hawk, a flame angel. Currently in Australia, they're going for like $400 to $500, which is crazy, I think. But I think they're really beautiful, and they're reef safe as well. So yeah, I think a flame angel would be my dream fish. Next question. So, how is the eShop's overflow? Any Boeing issues, and how was it plumbed? So I'll put up a little video here showing the back of it. The eShop's overflow was actually really easy to install. When I installed it when I first built the tank, so basically I laid the tank upside down and used the diamond bit to cut the hole out of the back. eShops, they also sent a little template as well. I really love the eShops overflow. I highly recommend it. I've modified it slightly just because I wasn't happy with how high the water line was originally. So I just drilled a few little holes in the base of it to allow the water to come down a little bit more. It is a little bit noisy. You can probably hear it in the back, but I don't mind that. I don't mind the noise. I think it's quite soothing, especially when you're sitting here at night. I just like the sound of water running. So yeah, recommend the eShops overflow. Next question is, so I want to get into marine biology. Should I do it? Similar to what I said before, I think if it's your passion, yes, but just because you want to do marine biology isn't a good enough sort of reason. You've got to have sort of a passion within marine biology. So like, do you really like phytoplankton? Do you really like deep ocean exploring? Do you really love coral reefs? Do you like coral physiology, or even photobiology? There's actually a lot of chemists even in marine science. Chemistry is not something I ever really thought I'd have to see again after school, and I didn't pursue it in year 11 and 12, and I wish I did, because now I'd say 30 to 40% of everything I do is chemistry based, and I'm constantly having to catch up and learn new things because I hadn't learned them previously. But at the same time, that's also what I love about research and doing a PhD, is that it's not about what you know, it's about how you learn it, and your ability to research things that you're unsure about. So yeah, look, if it's your passion, I do recommend doing it. So next question, what brands of fish food do you use, and what's your daily concoction? So up until a few months ago, I was using Ocean Nutrition pellets, which I've used for the past few years and absolutely loved. I started using the Aquaforest pellets as well. They're actually really good. They come in several different sizes. So I've got the smaller size to feed sort of my chromis, and the larger sizes to feed my tangs. I feed them maybe like once a day with those, or just whenever I have friends over. The rest of the time I normally use frozen food, so I use like mysis, brine shrimp with spirulina and garlic. Sometimes I use like crushed up, like I think it's cockles and stuff like that. Yeah, I prefer sort of the natural frozen food to the processed pellet food, just purely because I think the less processed, it's like what you put into your body, you want to eat more natural stuff as well. So all the food that comes from the wild that's natural, it's already got the right amounts and ratios of like phosphate and nitrogen and stuff like that. When you start using all these ultra processed foods and you use a lot of them, that's often when you can start to get these imbalances in those and get a lot of issues from it. And me being a little bit lazy, I don't really like to test nutrients that much. So I prefer just feed natural sort of stuff, and then I know that often my water quality is in check. So yeah, I feed a lot of frozen food, so about maybe anywhere from 2 to 4 cubes of frozen a day I feed. Does being a marine scientist pay the bills? Yes, it does. Look, so for me, after I finish my PhD, it generally takes about 7 years to get a PhD, and at that point you get a postdoc. And having a PhD is kind of the bare minimum in marine science, just because it's so competitive, and because there's a lot of research. And during your PhD, that's where you learn sort of a lot of your analytical and research skills as well, which is what's required in this. It's a basic requirement of the job, basically. So if you can imagine spending 7 to 8 years at uni, you'd want to be paid a fair amount. As a postdoc, you do still get paid a fair amount, like often it's in the 6 figures here in Australia. But if I was to stay an electrician or do literally almost any other line of work and train for that long, I would be on much more money. So it does pay the bills. If your aim is to make money, I don't recommend doing it, often too because it's salary based and you spend a lot more time at home researching stuff. Like probably spend 60 to 70 hours a week working, and you only get paid 40 hours a week. So if you're in it for the money, don't do it. But if you're worried about whether or not you can support yourself on the wage of a marine scientist, you definitely can. Okay, so next question. If you're jumping into saltwater for the first time, where should you start? I recommend just researching the hell out of it. So basically jumping on YouTube, any of the old reefing sites as well, forums, like I think there's Reef Central still up, any of those sites, and just do your research. The main thing is with keeping saltwater aquariums is you need to be able to sort of identify issues when they come up and be able to fix them on your own. There's people there to help and everyone's more than happy to help you. But it's up to you to be able to manage the health and livelihoods of not only the fish and the corals in your system. So yeah, sort of learning everything as you can, but you learn as you go as well. So I think maybe doing a lot of research before and during your tank setup, and introducing stuff slowly. So as you add stuff into your aquarium, maybe research it a bit. So if you're sort of starting to add soft corals, learn about the water quality parameters that they require, any feeding tips. But then also if you're adding fish into it, learn about the behavioural issues of those fishes, whether or not they're going to nip at corals, how many you can keep in a tank. So sort of learn as you go, but definitely make sure that you put a lot of effort into researching before you jump into it. So next question is, I am planning on a similar version of your tank. How shallow should it be? I've actually, if you remember, I'll put up a little thing here, but I've actually had a shallow version of this before. I believe it was 30 centimeters deep. I absolutely love that tank. It was so easy to work on. You literally put your hand in it and it only gets like wet up to here. It was super, super cool, but in saying that, you don't have a lot of real estate. So next question, do you keep a jump net on your tank? This tank? No, I don't. Previously I have kept jump nets on tanks, but all the fish in this tank are actually pretty good. If you were keeping wrasses and stuff like that, I would probably consider keeping a jump net, as they do tend to jump. But most of the fish in this tank have been in here for, 12, 18 months now and have never jumped out, touch wood. But yeah, on this tank, no jump net. I feel like the tank looks better as well without any jump net. Like the aesthetics, you kind of get an unobstructed view or top-down view of the tank as well. Okay, so next question. Is there any method to keeping the rainbow colours of acans? I'm not sure specifically for acans, but I can imagine it's quite similar to other corals, particularly corals like aquapora or just SBS in general. To get them to colour up, you need a little bit of nitrate in the water, not too much. You also need decent lighting as well. Having sort of a bit of a UV or a UV profile on the spectrum really helps to bring out those fluorescent proteins and stuff like that. But for acans, I'm not actually too sure. So I recommend maybe just adjusting your lights and maybe your nutrient levels as well. Okay, so here's another one. About to move house, best tips when moving to negotiate the loss of fish and coral. So as it so happens, we're moving apartments in 1 to 2 weeks, which means I'm going to have to take all of this with me. It's going to be a bit of a nightmare. I have moved tanks before, and the way I do it is generally, if I don't have another tank set up in the house I'm going to, I'll set up a bunch of boxes or just big water containers basically. I'll use the tank water in the tank and put them into those boxes. I'll set up an air stone and heater, depending on how long you're going to keep the corals and fish in there for. Generally, I only try and keep them in there for like half a day or a day or 24 hours at most. I'll transfer all the stock out of the tank into those containers. Make sure that the fish are nice and calm. Give them a good feed before you transfer them in. With corals, put some sort of light above it as well, just to sort of try and, makes it seem more natural, I guess. But yeah, transfer all the stock into the boxes, move your tank and system, try and take out as much water that's in the tank. So if this is a 300 or 300 litre tank, I'll try and take out about 200 litres of water and transfer that with me, and then fill up the tank with an additional new 100 litres of water. Make sure that new water is close in its parameters to what your old water is, so you don't want to be adding in water with an alkalinity of like 10 into a tank that typically has an alk of 7 and so on and so forth. Because that's when you get those jumps in numbers and parameters, that's when you're going to have issues when you put your corals back into the tank. So next question, what was my first LPS coral? I'll put a photo up of it here. It's actually, I've still got that coral and it is at the university in one of the tanks there because it's too big. But basically it was a big leather coral. And interestingly, this coral I actually had spawned quite a number of years back in my shallow reef tank. I think it was 3-4 years ago. I came home one night and there was all this like eggs and white stuff in the water, and I had a look and you could see all the little eggs coming up. So I'll put a video of that right there. But the coral itself is probably like that big now, which is generally how big they get in the wild. So I can well and truly say that it's matured. So are you willing to share the STL files to hang the blades? Yes, I am. Apologies to everyone who's been asking. I've been trying to develop a bit of a website with a few features on it. I'm still in the process of doing that. But once the website is developed, I'll have a place to upload files like this, as well as interact with me in a few new ways, and possibly even buy some merch and stuff like that as well. So next question is, I know you don't run heavy blues, but do you have a decent orange lens filter suggestion? No, sorry. I actually really don't like using lens filters at all. I never use them in any of my photography or videography, especially too because whilst it may fix the colour and the white balance in the tank, it makes the colour and white balance of the surrounding environment really off. It doesn't look natural at all. If you're just taking photos of corals or coral polyps and stuff like that, yes, use them, they can be useful. But I much prefer to manipulate the actual tank environment when taking photos rather than like manipulating them, like post-editing and stuff like that, because you always lose a little bit of quality in that. So no, sorry, can't recommend any filters for you. Okay, so next two questions are pretty much the same. So I've got, what is your advice for new people in saltwater, and how do you get started in aquarium reef keeping? So advice for new people, research as much as possible. Like I said before, like you'll learn as you go along, but the more information and knowledge or stuff that you can learn about before you put stock in your system, the better. It kind of just prepares you for what's coming. But ultimately, you learn most of it as you sort of progress through the hobby. But yeah, my one piece of advice would just be patient and do research, I reckon. So next question is, do you think it is feasible to run a 30-gallon reef on a canister filter? Yes, I think it's feasible. Should you do it? No, I don't think so. In aquariums, especially reef aquariums, we have so much like filtration and life support stuff. Things like skimmers, dosing, all that sort of stuff, even just extra space in your sump where you can store biological filter is a lot better. I've seen some people run very successful reef tanks on canister filters, but chances are that you probably won't be one of them, as these people often also put a lot of time and effort and money into these tanks as well. So by all means, give it a try. But if you're planning on starting a new reef system, I'd just plan to do it properly from the get-go. So next question, how much was the tank set up and how big is it, and can you show the rear weir system? Like I said before, I'll put a thing up there for you to see, the rear weir. I can't actually remember how much this tank system was to set up. I don't really want to say. Yeah, so I'll leave that one. Yeah, I'll answer a different one. So next question, how do you manage coral aggression? So like in previous videos, I've said often when I go away, I'll have to preemptively cut a lot of the corals. So one of the main ways I manage coral aggression is just by making sure that the corals aren't touching each other, and also always leaving like at least a few centimeters of space. It also depends, the amount of space you leave them depends on what sort of corals it is. If it's SPS, generally their stinging tentacles can only reach sort of a few mil to maybe a centimeter or two. So leaving gaps of a few centimeters is fine for them. If they're soft corals like goniopores or leathers and stuff like that, generally you want to leave a much greater distance. So goniopores, I kind of group them all together, same with my hammers, and then I'll leave like a good buffer of, I don't know, 5 or 10 centimeters around those ones. So space is everything in managing coral aggression. So next question is, have you ever had dinos? How did you overcome them, and or any other setback that tested your enthusiasm for the hobby? Yes, I have had dinos, and they nearly ruined me. In my previous tank, I had that tank running for 12, 18 months, and whilst I was away, I had a nutrient dropout, and I got dinos. They were really hard to manage. Kind of fortunately and unfortunately at the time, we were moving apartments, so I didn't really have time to fix the issue. I just started it up again and got rid of that system, as I've had dinos in tanks at the university, and it's taken me up to 6 months to get rid of them, just purely because you have to get all your nutrient balances back in check, you have to build up all your biological, all your bacterial communities, microbial communities, all that sort of stuff. So basically dinos is just when your microbial or bacterial communities crash, dinos come in, and then they outcompete everything else. So you have to gradually feed the tank enough, get everything in the right ratios, build up that microbial community so that it outcompetes all the dinos. And there's 101 ways to do that. I don't recommend adding like these one-stop formulas and stuff like that. They will get rid of the dinos, because often it just causes more issues later on. So yeah, time, your tank will just look like crap for the next few weeks, few months, but you can turn it around, and I have done previously. So next question, not a question, but a big inspiration to me and my boy learning the hobby. I think I love hearing people when they tell me that sort of stuff. As someone, like I've been in this hobby for 10, 15 years, and a big part of me learning to appreciate this hobby and wanting to pursue it further was seeing all the other tanks online. So yeah, I just want to thank everyone else who has been an inspiration to me over the past few years, because I would not be here without them. Next question. So brand and volume of the aquarium. So as you all know, the cabinet is custom made. The tank itself is an Aquasys 300. I think the total volume of this system is 300 litres. So the tank itself is like 260-ish, and then the sump's 40 litres. So this next one, 100% should go a cold water nanoforest. A cold water tank would be awesome. I have contemplated it in the past, especially being here in Sydney. We have a lot of nudie branches and stuff like that, which are native here. So I have considered that, and possibly will in the future. But right now, I really like my warm water corals, as Roger was watching. Yeah, so definitely on the cards for the future. So it says, what is the first step in keeping coral, I think is this question. So first step is making sure that all your water parameters are in check, making sure that you have all the key things you need when keeping coral. So make sure you've got enough light, make sure that you've got enough flow, and also just make sure that all your nutrients, alkalinity, calcium, are all in check as well. So yeah, I'd say those are sort of the key things you need to keep an eye out for. So this next one is, I love clownfish. Do you love clownfish? Yes, I do. They're some of my favourite fish. My clownfish just here love their gonioporas. The big one will often try and feed the gonies as well, which is really funny because the shrimp just comes along and steals the food after. But yes, I do love them. So next question, what are your reef tank parameters and what products are you using to supplement? So up until recently, my nutrients were really quite low, they were undetectable. Now they're running at about 10 ppb nitrates and 0.03, 0.06 phosphates. I don't know, I haven't checked, I probably should. But part of the reason I brought them up is because I just wanted a bit more colour out of my corals. In terms of other chemistry like alkalinity, I try and keep it between 8 to 9. I try and keep it a bit lower to limit growth. But I've done a fair bit of pruning recently, so I might try and just up it a little bit to help that growth. Calcium, pretty typical, anywhere between like 410 and 440. And magnesium, try and keep it around 1400, but that kind of drifts a bit. Yeah, so those are kind of the main key parameters I keep in my tank. Do you ever get the itch for freshwater? Yes, I do. I've seen so many cool freshwater aquascapes online. I'd really love a freshwater tank, but I'm only allowed 2 tanks in my apartment, so I have to choose, and I choose coral over freshwater, sorry. So what's your process of mounting corals going to be like on the upside down reef? So I'll be putting out a video on that shortly. When I move apartments, I'll be moving the upside down reef into that and finally putting water in it. I've just been holding off putting water in it because there's no point if I'm going to have to take it out again. But yeah, keep an eye out for that. But it actually won't be that much different to how I normally put corals on. It'll just be putting them on upside down. So this next question is, we want to know how you would build a nano tank, equipment, life forms, upkeep. I would probably have to do a whole video dedicated to this. Yeah, so I think I'll leave this question for another time. But basically, it'd just be all the same components that you use in a big tank, just a lot smaller, or maybe just a bit more maintenance. I don't know, I'd have to spend more time answering that question, sorry. So the next one is, I have a 12-gallon anemone tank. What size should I get next? How big's your apartment? I don't know. But I would say the next good size to get is probably something around this, so maybe a 200 to 300 litre tank. It has quite a lot of room in it, but it's quite easy to manage at the same time. If you have something go wrong, you can easily do a decent water change in it. But you have to also remember, the bigger the tank, the more expensive it is to stock. So it would be quite a big financial leap going from a 12-gallon to, say, a 200-gallon tank. So next question is, what got you interested in keeping a tank? So when I first started, probably like 15 years ago, I just had freshwater tanks. I really liked them, but I think what really sprouted it was going out to the reef for the first time and seeing all the corals going out there, and just seeing like how all the organisms sort of live harmoniously together out there, and how there's a lot of different relationships, like with the clownfish and anemones, but just even how beautiful they are. So I think that seeing all that nature in action just really, sort of started my enthusiasm for researching corals, and then eventually wanting to keep them in reef tanks. Also, growing up watching David Attenborough, still love his stuff, but when I was young, I'd just sit there for hours in front of it. Now I sit here in front of my tank for hours. Next question. Do you shoot most of your content solo, or do you have someone assisting you? That's a good question. Most of it's just solo. If there's any sort of camera movements or stuff where I have to move, I often get my wife to film with me. But it is difficult. I don't actually, often when I go to shoot reels, I have sort of a rough plan of what I want. I'll sort of think about sort of the logical steps in it, like where I need to be standing, what I need to be doing, what camera angles there are. So it's actually easier for me to just set up a tripod and do it myself, rather than have to tell someone else where to move and how to move and how quickly they have to move and stuff like that. If you have people like directors, they're great because then they just tell you where everyone should go. But personally, it's actually just easier for me to shoot it solo. So second last question. Third last. So what's the biggest mystery you've solved in your tank, and what's your personal scientific research interest? Okay, so the first one, biggest mystery. I've had quite a few. One I can think off the top of my head recently was all my seriatoporas started dying from the base up. I had no idea why. Everything was in check, nothing had changed. However, my wrasse had recently died, maybe a few months or a month ago, and I had been noticing a rise in Astrina starfish. But then it didn't occur to me until I came down one night, because I knew that these don't eat healthy tissue. But then I've got a friend who also researches starfish, and the way that they eat is often they eject their stomach acid onto the thing that they're eating. So I came down one night and saw these Astrina starfish on the base of my seriatoporas, and I thought, maybe what's happening is that the seriatoporas were dying from the base up a little bit, which kind of generally happens as they grow more and more because they don't get as much light down there. So these starfish are probably eating away at the dead tissue on the base, but as they inject their stomach acids into the stuff they're trying to eat, they're killing the tissue right next to it as well on accident. And it just kind of forms a chain reaction, because then they come back the next night and eat the dying tissue. So what I started doing was actually removing all these Astrina starfish, and almost overnight my seriatoporas stopped dying from the base up. So that was one mystery which I managed to solve pretty quickly, which was good. But yeah, unfortunately a lot of my seriatoporas looked a bit ugly, so I had to frag them up, and I'll put them back in there so that they can regrow. So second last question is, how do you keep your pH stable? So I actually use a CO2 scrubber hooked up to my skimmer. It's really good at just absorbing, especially living in an apartment, often we have it closed up, so the CO2 in the apartment builds up, and that'll bring your pH down. So what the CO2 scrubber does is it just gets all the air to pass through the scrubbing media. It takes out all the CO2, and then that oxygen or CO2 depleted air then goes into your skimmer. What that means is, because there's less CO2 going into your skimmer, which is bubbling the water, you won't get as much of a decrease in your pH. So before I had that CO2 scrubber, often I was getting pH fluctuations of like 8.4 all the way down to 7.7, 7.8 at night. Now I'm getting 8.4 to about 7.9 to 8. So it's really just taking the edge off that, which is what you want with your reef tank. You get natural pH shifts in the wild, but to what extreme? You've got to be careful sometimes. So what's the hardest thing? This is the last question. What's the hardest thing with saltwater, with a saltwater reef tank? If you know what the issue is, it's not hard to fix. However, the hardest part is knowing what the issue is. Often, like I was just mentioning with the starfish, like your sea coral's dying and you've measured all your water parameters and nothing's off. And then you have to kind of think back to maybe a few weeks, a few months ago and think, oh, well, what did I change there? Did I change the type of food I was using? Did I do this? Did I do that? So that's probably the hardest part of keeping a reef tank. But yeah, so that's all the questions. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you just enjoyed me rambling on for a few minutes. But yeah, feel free to reach out if you've got any other questions. And yeah, I'm keen to move apartments. I'll do a video on me moving this fish tank, as well as eventually setting up the new upside down reef tank in a few weeks. So yeah, thanks for watching.